We are here. We did it. I finally finished my top 50 albums of 2024. Hopefully I can get this out before the end of the year. I put a lot of effort into it this year because there was so many good albums. This is one of the best years for music, I think, in recent history. I think it rivals 2016. I wouldn't stress too much about the placements, especially the beginning of this list. Once we get to the top 20 or so, that's a little bit more accurate. But there was so many albums that could have been in here that aren't. Some people are going to be disappointed, but that's just the way that it goes. Top 50 albums of 2024, starting at 50. An album that, I really loved. I think that it's one of the best debut albums coming out of England. This year, it's English Teacher. This could be Texas. At 49 is Biba Doobie with This Is How Tomorrow Moves. This brings back that 2000s indie pop, indie rock energy. Love the guitar work on here. 48 is Julie with My Anti-Aircraft Friend. I thought that the guitar work on this album and the sound is so fresh for indie rock. I wish more indie rock music sounded like this right now. At 47, Godspeed You Black Emperor. This is my favorite Godspeed You Black Emperor album in a very long time. 46, Cassandra Jenkins, My Light, My Destroyer. One of my favorite singer-songwriters out there right now. I love her sound. I love the instrumentation and saxophone. All of the space that she builds on this record. Speaking of great singer-songwriters, Haley Hendricks is one of the best up-and-coming songwriters right now. Love her voice, and I think the imagery that she uses in her songwriting is super interesting and unique. I was not a big fan of Lizzie McAlpine. I wasn't. I was not a big fan of Lizzie McAlpine, but this album, out of nowhere, is fucking amazing. It's so good. And yeah, this is definitely the biggest leap in quality I've seen from an artist, from a singer-songwriter in a while, because I didn't like her last album really that much at all, but loved this one. I love the woodsy feel of it. Claros Charm. I wish this album had a little bit more Claros songwriting focus in it, but the instrumentation is so good, and there are moments like Pure 4. Amazing album. Love it. 42, Tinashe, Quantum Baby. The hooks on this record are out of control. She just glides on these beats. I love the combination of the electronic music production and those classic R&B elements, and she has one of my favorite voices in R&B or pop music right now. Love Tinashe and what she's doing. Speaking of pop music, banger after banger after banger on this record. Bridges that gap of indie pop and hyper pop and traditional pop music in a really great way. So much fun. The hooks are really what sell this record for me. At 40, Alix, Girl With No Face, a really refreshing take on 80s pop music, a genre that I think has just become way too prevalent. Everybody's taking a swing at it, but I think Alix does it way better than 99% of artists out there right now on this album. And she actually brought her own flavor to it. She isn't just doing what everybody else is doing in that 80s pop landscape. At 39 is an album that I think would have been higher earlier in the year. It did grow off of me a little bit, but I love the sound that they go for on this record. It's kind of a futuristic take on indie rock. I thought this album was a ton of fun, so I really enjoyed it. 38 is No Worries, Anderson .Paak. With Knowledge, Why Loud, Lord, whatever you want to say. Overall, it is just so smooth, and it has really fun storytelling moments on it as well. Great record. At 37, Adrien Laker, one of my favorite songwriters in the world. Songs, I think, was number 2 on my albums of the year in 2020. It's a super intimate record. The highlights off of this album and the emotional depth of this album will forever stick with me. 35, how do The Cure still sound good? How does Robert Smith still sound like himself? It does sound like a classic album by The Cure, but it does also sound like an evolution of their sound. If you can accomplish both of those things, feel like an elevated version of yourself, especially a band that is this old and has been doing it for this long, I think that that's a huge accomplishment. 34, the textures of this Floating Points record are just scratch your brain in such a crazy way. As a synth production nerd myself, I think it doesn't get much better than this. 33, Laura Marling, Patterns in Repeat. Songwriting is out of this world. I swear to God, the imagery, how clear Laura Marling gets across an emotion and paints a picture on this album is unbelievably impressive. 32, Another up-and-coming band, Freo, Where We've Been, Where We Go From Here. It just packs such a punch emotionally due to the intensity of how these instrumentals build. 31, emo album of the year for me. It's Touche Amore, Spiral in a Straight Line. It has such a nice little like sludgy bass to it, but it also has that clarity there as well in the songwriting. 30 is Chelsea Wolfe, She Reaches Out, She Reaches. This album is such a unique experience because it is kind of trip-hoppy. It is kind of a singer-songwriter project, but it really does have a super spooky, Halloween-y energy to it. So it's a haunting album. At 29 is a band that I feel like I've been carrying on my shoulders that I don't see a lot of other people appreciating this album as much as I think it deserves to get appreciation for, because I think that the shoegazy sound that they have on this record feels really fresh to me. I love the lead vocalist. 28 is Quadeca. I know a lot of people put this way higher. At the end of the day, this is just a really good collection of songs. I don't really have much bad to say about it, so I think it deserves to be here, but I'm sorry it's not higher to the Quad Believers. At 27, I have Joey Valentin, Bray. It's just nonstop fun, bro. This is one of my most listened to albums of the year. I could not stop listening to this record this year. It is just banger after banger after banger. Clever line after clever line after clever line. Pop culture references everywhere, and it's always funny, never corny somehow. I really believe in this duo. I think that they're going to do great things, and hopefully they continue to sound like this because this album's awesome. At 26, classic band, and somehow they came back to form here. I think that this is easily their best album since their self-titled record, or Crosses, whatever you want to call it. At 25 is McAlpine. I think that this is McAlpine's best album. That seems to be the sentiment from a lot of people. And I love how he's doing that abstract rap thing, the introspective, conscious writing, but also there's like bangers like the title track with Kaytranada too. So I love the variety that this album brings. This is Elucid album's Revelator, which is kind of industrial. It's definitely an experimental rap record. It has that abstract rap sound to it as well that you might know Elucid from Arm & Hammer, who Diabetic Test Strips was one of my favorite albums 2 years ago, and I just love the sound that he developed on this album. Great solo record from him. 23, Foxing. I've been a huge fan of Foxing since the Albatross, and that was more of an emo record. This is a very different sound for them. I think this is what would you call it, chat? More like post-hardcore, right? Which apparently they've done before. I think I'm missing some albums in their catalog that I haven't listened to, but I love this new sound for them. I think that they sound super comfortable in it. And it still has that emotional impact that their emo work did too. So I loved this album. 22, The Last Dinner Party, Prelude to Ecstasy. This is actually like seemingly a really big year for debut albums from indie rock bands. The sound that they developed, that this band developed on this record, sounds like they must have been a band for like 10 years. It's so impressive as a debut album. The ABBA influences, the Arcade Fire influences, Florence and the Machine influences. It all culminates into this one thing. There's psychedelic rock in here as well, and yeah, it also has this great like storytelling, really unique sort of storytelling in the songwriting as well, which I think really adds a lot to the flavor of this album. It sounds so rich, so lush. Totally agree. I think this album is brilliant. One of the best debut albums, I think, of the 2020 so far, easily. At 21, Raven Lene, Bird's Eye. I loved her last album too. This one, it moves a little farther away from electronic stuff, a little bit more to live instrumentation, but I think that Raven Lene is easily one of my favorite voices in R&B right now. And oh my god, dude, it's like indie pop, indie rock, R&B, all of this stuff all at once. There's pop rock in here. It keeps you constantly entertained, yet it still has like such a cohesive feel to it despite going to all of these different places. At 20, this artist seems to be divisive. McGee seems to be really divisive for my community, for my chat. I personally am rewarding this album based off of not just the fact that I think that the songwriting is good, that the individual moments on this album are really strong, but this sound I'm addicted to. The guitar tones that he develops and the way that he plays them, I think is absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to ride for McGee on this one. At 19 is the darkest in Staples album, easily. Dark Times. It's emotional. It's really personal, but the rapping performances are also great. There's awesome hooks on here as well. Every track seems to be so memorable, whether it's for the lyricism, the hooks, the beats. I think that every single one of these tracks brings something different to the table, but really hammers down a specific message of what's going on in Vince Staples' life as well. At 18, one of my favorite electronic albums of the year, it's JamXX in Waves. Was In Color his last album before this? Jesus Christ, what a long wait. In Color is one of my favorite albums ever. This one is pretty good too. I think that it moves a little farther away from the UK garage stuff, even though that's still in there. Moves a little bit more towards house music. But banger after banger on this album. Again, it's those synth leads that JamXX does on top of his sample usage and his beats that I think makes him a really, really special artist. 17 is the most palatable Shushu album. I think it's pretty safe to say that. Shushu is a scary group, bro. I feel like Shushu is really hard for pretty much anyone to get into, even myself, right? I've really liked some other Shushu projects as well. But like me personally, I've never had a Shushu album that I'm like, wow, I really want to go back to the Shushu record. Like, that was a really cool experience, but I've never had a moment that I was like, I really need to listen to some Shushu. But this album, I thought, blew me away in terms of the vision that this record has, but it's also an album that I wanted to listen to, and I wanted to keep going back to, and I kept finding new things that I like about it as well. 16 is Beyonce's Cowboy Carter. I've said previously, I think this album is a little messy. I think they could have made it a little tighter and kept it eclectic like it was supposed to be. But I think at the end of the day, this album is so ambitious, and I think that Beyonce pulled it off at a really high level. The songwriting is some of the best I've ever heard on a Beyonce record. I think that it's really impressive that she can do all of these styles at such a high level, but it is a little bit of a mess, and I don't think it's as good as Renaissance, so that's why I didn't quite get in the top 10 for me. At 15 is Cindy Lee, Diamond Jubilee. Again, the way that these songs build and the way the tracks develop over time in terms of the songwriting, I think is just totally brilliant. At 14, insane guitar work. Vintage Jack White, but he's also finding out weirder and weirder stuff to do with his guitar on this record. Insanely impressed by this album. It sounds already classic. Day one feels vintage. 13, Tyler the Creator, Chromacopia. I think easily one of the most visionary hip-hop artists of our time. To call him just a hip-hop artist, I think is a little bit of disservice to him as well, because I just think he has one of the best creative minds in music right now. Beyond just the music, but developing a world and an image for every single record that he makes. And I think that this album at 12, Knocked Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To, one of the hardest hitting albums of the year, Mother of God, Jesus Christ, the wall of sound that they develop on parts of this album is insane. It'll just knock you off your feet. Oh my God, sometimes in the best way possible. Knocked Loose just drills into my brain with this album. So yeah, love the record. And yeah, I don't know how they made these songs sound the way that they do and sound this harsh, but still cut through. But honestly, credit to the mastering and mixing engineers, because insane album. At 11 is what I think is probably the best Father John Misty album. Maybe it's I Love You, Honey Bear. I also am a fan of pure comedy, but as of right now, I'm really in love with this record, and it's the dynamics of this album. Obviously, top tier Father John Misty songwriting, but the dynamics of this album is really what sells it for me. We're in the top 10 now. At number 10 is Billie Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft. Ambient sound of this album, the ad-libs, the strings, the synth work from Phineas, all of that building these songs that I think that are also the basis of them is so personal and the most mature of Billie's entire career. And you can tell that she really took the reins of the songwriting here, which I think that she said in an interview that Phineas was a little bit more hands-off than he usually is with the songwriting, and she took the lead. And you can really tell here, and I'm really impressed by the songwriting. And there's amazing highlights like Blue on this album that really tie the album together in a extremely impressive way. Yeah, I think it might not be the most experimental or the most boundary pushing album production wise, but I think at the end of the day, production is supposed to service the song, and I think that the production and what Phineas does on this absolutely did that this time around. At number 9, God, this album is so much fun, but then every once in a while, this record is just like makes you so sad. At number 9 is Porter Robinson's Smile. It hit me in the feels emotionally in a similar way than Nurture did with a couple of these songs. But at its core, this album is sugary. It's fun. The guitar parts are insane. It has these, insane guitar leads, really poppy choruses, that almost remind me of like The Killers or Jimmy Eat World, but it also feels almost hyper poppy with how sugary it is as well. Really interesting record, and definitely one of the best electropop albums I've heard in recent history. Porter Robinson just cannot miss lately. Number 8, Vampire Weekend, Only God Was Above Us. What a new, fresh take on the Vampire Weekend sound that they have here. I think that they've really developed what Vampire Weekend sounds like on this album. This album, I think, took a bigger step than they ever have in terms of developing their sound with the instrumentation and the stuff that the weird instrumental moments that they decide to add on here, the total abandonment of song structure in a couple of these tracks. Really artsy project from them, and I think that it paid off. A lot of people didn't see this coming, but Igloo Ghost, Title Memory XO. Does anyone know how insane this album is? The glitchy production of this record, I think, is some of my favorite electronic music production in terms of a vision and a sound that I've heard in recent memory. It's one of my favorite electronic albums of the 2020s. If you haven't checked it out, please check it out. All right, number 6, Kendrick Lamar's GNX. Listen, loved it the first time I heard it. The more I listened to it, the more I was like, even the songs that I didn't love the first time around, Kendrick has a special talent for doing this that the more I listened to it, the more I was like, you know what? Peekaboo's kind of a banger. Like, it's a ridiculous song, but it's kind of a banger. I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome or if I'm just like a Kendrick fanboy and I won't let him ever drop the ball. But the songs that I found boring, like I was not a big fan of Dodger Blue the first time I heard it. I thought it sounded kind of like playlist fodder. I thought Peekaboo was a little bit too goofy for me. But by the 5th, 6th listen of this album, and I was just like, okay, no, this entire album, it hits at every point. So I love how he just kind of gives us everything. He gives us the silliness, the silly bangers where he's just goofing around. He gives us those super introspective tracks. He gives us these concept songs like Reincarnated. It's a little bit of everything, which I think is perfect for anybody that is a Kendrick fan. While it isn't a concept record like that, I think it's a sampling platter of everything that Kendrick is good at, which is a lot. We're in the top 5 now with one of the biggest albums of the year, an absolute breakthrough record for an artist that, has been around for a long time. I've loved for a very long time. I'm sure a lot of people in my chat have loved for a very long time. It's Charlie XCX with Brat. I think this album, loved it the second that I heard it. Still not my favorite Charlie XCX album. It's How I'm Feeling Now. I'm sorry. I don't think it's her best record. That's just a testament to how good she is, because she's in my top 5 albums of this year. She was in my top 3 albums of the year when in 2020 with How I'm Feeling Now. She keeps moving pop music forward. I think that it does kind of bridge that gap between what she was trying to do, making a hit record with Crash, and in blending the sounds of How I'm Feeling Now on Pop 2 and the experimental clubbiness of those records. And I think this is a kind of a perfect meeting place of those two worlds. And I think that she does a really great job of doing that. And honestly, like, the confusion of how this album is so popular and why now, I think the more that I heard this album and the more I listened to it, the more it made sense to me. Because while it is the branding, it is also just that perfect meeting place, I think, of pushing pop music forward and trying something different, but also making it so catchy. It's really such a unique album. And number 4, Mount Eerie, Night Palace. Phil Alverum is just, he's the GOAT. He's just one of the best songwriters to ever exist. The way that this album develops, the fact that it's this long and it kept me entertained, I think is easily the most impressive part about this record. Obviously, the songwriting is out of control. It's Phil Alverum, so no surprises there. All right, at number 3, I think that it might be the best hip-hop producer in the world. Most impressive stylistic vision I think I've ever seen accomplished by this artist. It's JPEG Mafia. It's Peggy with I Lay Down My Life For You. I think the most impressive part about this record is that one of these ideas, I think, is something that your normal artist would be like, okay, let's center the album around this, right? Strings. Okay, let's do a hip-hop record, experimental hip-hop record with strings. Oh, let's do an experimental hip-hop record with these really interesting electric guitars. Okay, he's like, no, I want to do both of those, and I also want it to be sample heavy like some of my other work. and I also want to like have some of my best lyrical moments of my entire career also on this album. It's a really ambitious record. It's also so fun. It's hard. It's gritty, but it also has these moments on the album in the outros and in songs like On or Off Drugs where it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Moving on to number 2. It's a concept record. And one of the weirdest concept records I've ever heard in my entire life. I think I'm going to say the concept alone deserves a prize of its own because it's so weird. It is so weird. But the fact that like an album with this concept and this sort of story also almost brought me to tears at multiple times is something that is hard for me to believe happened the first time I listened to this album. But I guess it's just a testament to how unique of an individual Jordy G is. At number 2, I have The New Sound by Jordy G. Bizarre record, okay? The way that it's arranged is insanely impressive. Obviously, it has like the crazy instrumentation that a Black Midi album would have because Jordy G from Black Midi. But I think that in terms of like the concepts and the individual songs and the storytelling within them and the overall messaging of this album of getting that story across while also like doing something that is talking about something that is so weird and so bizarre. This album is about a despicable man, an absolute like creature of a person falling in love with a prostitute, but like really in being weird about it and creepy, but also somehow you feel bad for him, and then you're like, oh wait, this is a love song, this is kind of beautiful, but you're like, oh wait, no, this guy's a despicable creep. I think the conflicting emotions that this album brings out of the listener, I think, is so impressive, and then obviously, you know, everything else about it, brilliant in terms of the instrumentation, the way it's produced. At number 1, there's only a couple albums that have ever done this for me that I've felt like it is a 10 out of 10 in terms of ambitiousness. Like, oh my god, what you're going for here is so easy to fall on your face because it is so ambitious and you are like shooting for the moon with like what the overall goal is to make this epic record. And then it's also 10 out of 10 execution, 10 out of 10 on adventure, like being adventurous, but also somehow 10 out of 10 on flawlessness. Instant classic for me. Pretty much a perfect synth pop record. I couldn't imagine a better one. Magdalena Bay, Imaginal Disc. I wish I could have surprised you guys. Similar to the way that I felt in 2022 with Ants From Up There by Black Country New Road. Making the obvious choice is also just me making the honest choice. I think I'd be lying to you guys if I chose any other album to be unique. But this is simply, upon release, the day that I listened to it, I was like, there's no contest unless somebody else makes a generational album. But like the likelihood of another artist making a generational record like this, I think is was pretty low. Yeah, my album of the year is Magdalena Bay, Imaginal Disc. Music just does not get much better than this. Oh my god, it's so good. Oh yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe and all of that stuff. There's actually reactions to a lot of these albums that I have over on my Patreon, so go check that out as well.